Hello there, friends. Welcome to another episode of Brown Bags and Bibles. Scott Wakefield, lead pastor at First Christian Church, joined as always by
Mark Liebert, one of the elders at First Christian Church and Scott's partner for all things Brown Bags and Bibles.
And here on Brown Bags and Bibles, we are in episode 11, I think, of the world religions, new religious movements, and cults. Mm-hmm. And we're doing two offshoots of Islam. Mm-hmm. The first is Baha'i.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll do Baha'i today.
So I want to tell everybody, Baha'i, glad you're with us.
Just a reminder, we are using Dr. Derek Cooper's book, Christianity and New Religious Movements, an introduction to the world's newest faiths. Very, very helpful. That'll be a lot of our content and structure, and we'll add a lot along the way. But great book to pick up, published just last year.
And the headings and the structure from week to week, because we're using him, is a helpful way for people who are
if they're listening to more than one of these, they'll see some similarity there.
Yeah.
So, by the way, I don't know if you knew this, Dr. Derek Cooper came out of the Restoration movement.
Oh, I did not know.
Yes, he did. Yep. He just mentioned that in one of the places I was reading. I didn't know we had that in common.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So, new religious movements. Intro. We have focused on the 6 major world religions, Hinduism/Buddhism. So that's both from India, those two. Hinduism and Buddhism. Confucianism and Taoism, both from China. And Judaism and Islam from the Middle East. Mm-hmm. India, China, Middle East. I didn't recognize that earlier.
Yeah. And so these new religious movements all come out of one of those world faith traditions. Yeah. So as Scott said, Baha'i that we'll do today comes from Islam. Mm-hmm. It's an offshoot of Islam, rejected by Orthodox Islamists.
Yes, I was going to say.
Yeah.
That's part of why the distinction from major world religions. It is size and influence, but it's also the rest of these are offshoots, and most of these folks don't think that these folks over here are valid.
Right. So you can call these new religions, alternative religions, fringe religions, new religious traditions.
Used to be called a sect, S-E-C-T.
Cult isn't used anymore because it's a very pejorative term.
And cult would be something that eventually was like a third movement and step that was not a gathering of very many people, and there are other things like that too. Yeah.
All right, so Baha'i, B-A-H-A
apostrophe
I.
Baha'i.
Yeah. So we're saying Baha'i is an offshoot from Islam, and these are new religious movements, so relatively new. This began in the mid-1800s in Iran.
And apparently they're headquartered, I did not know this, in Israel.
They are
Haifa.
now.
Yeah.
Yes, because they were persecuted in Iran, not welcomed by the Orthodox Islamists. So they ended up moving to Haifa, Israel.
Yeah. And one thing we have that's a note here is that it's not called Baha'ism or something like that. It's Baha'i faith or just Baha'i.
Yeah.
I am Baha'i, or I believe in the Baha'i faith, or I'm of the Baha'i faith.
Yeah, so we'll talk that way, and he does in his chapter, just call it Baha'i.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're way more than I thought. 8 million is more.
Yeah. 8 million around the world. And Baha'i is known for oneness of God. And we'll get into this in their beliefs. Oneness of God, oneness of humanity.
Yes.
Oneness of all religion.
It's a syncretistic
very much
movement. Yeah. S-Y-N. Yeah. Together. One.
You think Baha'i, you think oneness. So we'll get into that.
Most of them apparently come from India, which kind of makes sense-ish. United States, which will eventually make some sense, I think. Kenya and Vietnam.
Yeah, I didn't know that those were the main places. Yeah.
Yeah. The Kenya and Vietnam part surprised me.
Yeah. This is an extremely diverse religion. Dr. Cooper, and again, this is just published last year. These are current stats. 50% of all American Baha'i congregations are multiracial.
I've known 2 Baha'i families, and they were both. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Suburban Chicago.
Our church in Florida that we came from 15 years ago, literally next door to some Baha'i building. I don't know if it was a house of worship or what it was, but it was Baha'i next to us, right next to us.
Huh.
Yeah.
We had to go as a part of a class like this in college, and we went to Baha'i.
In the Chicago area?
Yeah, the only one of the big mamas that exists.
Yeah, in the Chicago suburbs. Yeah.
And I had to go interview a family afterward and talk to them about how this works in their life.
Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, very good.
So beginning, creation.
Yeah, so as you might expect, Baha'i comes from Islam, we said. So they're going to have similar views of creation. We're not going to get into that. Go to our episode on the Islamic faith, on Muslims. But basically, one God, it's monotheistic, who created all things simply by speaking it into existence, created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, a linear progression of time,
Not cyclical. Yes.
Because it comes from Islam.
Yeah,
So-
right. That does make sense.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think that's all we need to say about their view of creation.
The rest you can see in Islam.
Yeah.
Historical origins,
Yeah, where did this come from?
we already implied, comes from Islam, but it is from Shiite Islam,
Yes.
not Sunni.
Yeah.
And it's in Iran, and it's Shiite, not Sunni. Sunni is 85%, Shiite's 15%. At least that's generally what people recognize even nowadays.
Right.
And in Sunni, the leadership is based on character, and the imam leads the mosque but is not clergy.
Right.
But in Shia, which Baha'i is a splinter from, leadership is based on heredity, and the imam is infallible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Go back to Islam to get more details on that, but that's just the two main differences,
Yeah.
Sunni and Shia. So this is a Shiite breakoff, and specifically, it came from the Baha'i religion, B-A-B-I,
B-A-B-I, yeah.
which itself was part of what's called the Twelver School of Shiite Islam. We'll talk about that here in just a minute, the Twelver School of Shiite Islam. But there are three key historical leaders for Baha'i.
And they all have lots of B's and A's and
Yes, they do.
H's and L's in them.
Yes.
The first is Al-Bab,
Al-Bab.
1819 to 1850.
Yes, so his original name was Sayyid Ali Muhammad, but he is regarded as the forerunner of Baha'i and the founder of the Baha'i religion. We'll explain the Baha'i part in here just a minute. But the Baha'i religion is significant because, like we said, it was connected to Twelver Shia Islam.
12 imams.
Yes.
Right.
12 imams who descended directly. You said the heredity was key
Yeah.
here in Shia Islam. 12 imams who descended directly from Muhammad through his daughter Fatima. So that's where the Twelver religion comes from. But the 12th imam went into hiding, what they call occultation.
Yeah. I've never seen that term for that, but
And isn't supposed to return until the day of judgment. And again, all this is from Dr. Cooper. He explains the 12th imam began office in AD 844. And so in Twelver Shiism, they believe he would return about 1,000 years later in 1844.
it's always interesting how people who start new religious movements like this often will talk about a judgment day or something like that. This happens to be somehow closely related to when they were alive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Sayyid Ali Muhammad lived at this time of great apocalyptic fervor because it had been 1,000 years in Twelver Shia Islam, and they're all expecting something to happen. Well, he claimed to be the long-awaited promised one.
That's kind of what I was meaning to imply earlier.
Yes. And here's where the term comes from. He declared himself to be Al-Bab.
The gateway.
The gateway. That's where we get the term the Baha'i religion. Bab is the gateway. I am the Bab. That's what he said.
I've known some Bobs. So Al-Bab, or Sayyid Ali Muhammad, began by teaching his followers to follow Sharia Muslim law.
Right.
And this begins the splinter.
Right. So he's orthodox
Stuff.
in the beginning.
Yeah, he's clearly Islamic, Muslim. However, his claims to new revelation soon exceeded Sharia law and put him at odds with the authorities.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense.
Yes. So in 1844, again, think of the year there, 1,000 years later, he claims to be God's messenger, God's prophet, the promised one, and the word.
All of those have capitals at the beginning.
They do. Yeah.
Okay. In fact, he claimed to be the successor to not only Muhammad, but also Christ.
Okay. Pretty heady stuff.
It is. So according to Baha'i, the purpose of the Bab was to prepare people for an even greater messianic figure.
So again, we're telling you he's coming out of Shia Islam. They were not pleased with him.
I doubt that they liked him.
And they issued what's called a fatwa. Many people have heard of it. It's a religious ruling.
Yes.
That was issued against him and his followers, again, in Iran, where he was coming
it's
from.
a religious war declaration.
Right. He's not popular with
Yeah.
the Shia clerics.
Yeah.
So in 1847, he was imprisoned. And the reason his life is short, he was killed. He was killed by firing squad in 1850.
However, his followers were guided by the thousands of verses that he had composed while in prison.
Yes. He was prolific in his writing. All right. So that's the first one. That's
Second one is also one with some A's and B's and L's in it.
Yep.
Baha'u'llah.
Baha'u'llah.
And a little later, mostly because this person lived longer, 1817 to 1892.
Right. So his given name was Mirza Hussein Ali, as you said, born in 1817. And at age 27, remember, 1844 is the key year, he became a follower of the Bab, the one we just talked about. So now he's deeply involved in the Bab's work. He's a believer in him. He promotes him. He's working closely with him until the Bab dies.
Yeah.
And so Baha'u'llah effectively takes over. So when the Bab was imprisoned, it was Baha'u'llah, or Ali, who traveled widely, promoting his message, making converts.
Yep. So he led the believers of the new Baha'i religion to receive new names.
Now we're going to learn about the names.
In 1848. And names are a big thing. His became the Baha'u'llah, or the glory of God. And while imprisoned in Tehran in 1852, received a vision that he was God's messenger, capital G, capital M. But he kept it in private.
Right. So he returns to Baghdad in 1856. And here he finds the Baha'i religion in disarray. Remember, their founder has died. And so he basically takes over to inspire the people, help them coexist at that time with traditional Shia Muslims at that time.
That's significant.
But he makes a break in 1863.
Yeah. He tries to coexist. But in 1863 at a festival, he revealed his identity as God's messenger, the one that the Bab had prophesied about. And that was problematic.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's now referred to as the Declaration in Ridvan, and it marks the official beginning of the Baha'i faith. So that's a key date here, the Ridvan Festival, 1863, the official beginning. So he made 3 claims.
Yep. Number one, the Baha'i faith would not use violence. No jihad.
We're thankful for that.
Yes, which he was trying to do. He was trying to no jihad with the jihadists. I'll just leave that term there. Number 2, he would be the last manifestation of God for the next 1,000 years.
It's interesting. I am the last manifestation for the next 1,000 years. Kind of limits it exclusively to me, but anyway.
Yeah. And yet there will be another. And it's in 1,000 years. Yeah. How come 1,000 is always the thing? It's always 1,000. Thirdly, his message was blessed and expanding.
Well, it definitely expanded.
It worked.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, as you might expect, he was exiled to Turkey and then lived in Israel. And here's the Israeli connection. He lived in Israel until he died, naturally, in 1892.
So the new religion that had begun with the Bab grew to be known as the Baha'i faith in Israel. And Baha'u'llah wrote more than 15,000 works.
Yes.
Now regarded as having divine revelation by his followers.
Yeah. He made a lot of claims. He said all people should obey him. And Dr. Cooper
I've made that claim myself.
Okay, fair enough.
About all people.
Particularly in your family, yes. He wrote to world leaders, urging them to repent and follow him. Pretty audacious.
Dude.
But his claims were crazy. You want to read that part?
He claimed to be the Messiah for 6 different religious movements. And this is very significant in what ends up developing. Claimed to be the Messiah for 6 different religious movements: Judaism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Shia Islam, Sunni Islam, and then, of course, the Baha'i religion.
Yeah, I'm the Messiah for all of that. Wow. So Baha'u'llah is important. Remember, the name means the glory of God.
Yes, and then the third... third? How many we're looking at here?
Third person.
Okay, yeah. Third key historical figure also has lots of A's and H's and L's and U's. Abdul Baha. Before he died in 1921, so he's 1844 to 1921. Before he died, Baha'u'llah appointed his oldest son, Abdul Baha, to be his interpreter at age 48.
So he was born 1844. All these key dates keep coming to 1844. So Abdul Baha was born in 1844 on the exact same night that the original Bab declared himself to be the gateway.
Yeah.
So now Abdul Baha is the son of Baha'u'llah. And he traveled frequently with his father, Baha'u'llah, knew all the key people in the Baha'i faith, but his name, Abdul Baha, and their names are significant, just means servant
of Baha.
Of Baha. Because his dad, Baha'u'llah, made it clear his son was not a manifestation of God like he was in the original Bab had been.
Because he was glory of God.
Right, and it'd be 1,000 years before another one comes. So his son's important, but he's just a servant. So Abdul was very capable as an ambassador. He traveled extensively. He represented the Baha'i faith. And the key here is he offered Baha'i as an alternative to the world's evils.
Which is a key thing for them still today. Wrote thousands and thousands of documents, apparently, which are all considered authoritative but not divine.
Because he's not a manifestation of God.
Right. Yeah. This may be like how we work this stuff out and practical applications, maybe.
Yeah.
This included the will and testament that outlined, though, the beliefs, practices, and polity of the Baha'i faith. So he was a...
He's a key administrator.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, too, an administrator and a coordinator of all that.
All right, last person who's key to the Baha'i faith is Shoghi Effendi.
Not very many A's, B's, H's, or L's. In fact, none of those in Shoghi Effendi. So 1897 to 1957, and toward the end of his life in 1921, Abdul Baha appointed his grandson, Shoghi Effendi, as the guardian.
Yes. Just like his grandfather, he had access to all the key leaders in the movement. So you've got a family now of the grandfather, the son, and now the grandson. But he was an interpreter, not a manifestation of God. Again, the Bab is a manifestation of God. Baha'u'llah is a manifestation of God. Abdul Baha is not, and his son Shoghi Effendi is not. But he was really important because when the British took control of the Holy Land, they liked this Baha'i faith.
Yes, they were friendly to it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he was the one who expanded and beautified the headquarters in Haifa and made it an international destination as it is today.
So Effendi spoke many languages and translated key Baha'i writings into European languages, which helped all of this, I'm sure. That's why it's a key thing to say there. And then the religion's ability to expand was also strengthened by his, not just languages, but his administrative skills. He died unexpectedly in 1957, but had put in place, being an administrator, the institutional structures that exist today.
Right. So today there's no one worldwide leader. These four were the only ones like that. But the structures that he put in place carry them forward since that time.
Yeah.
And in fact, since 1963, Baha'i, or the Baha'i faith, has been led by 9 members elected every 5 years. You've heard of perhaps the Universal House of Justice. That's in Haifa, Israel. It's like a Supreme Court for all their doctrine and practice.
Yeah. And there are also not just those 9 members elected every 5 years who are the Supreme Court type people. There are also local leaders consisting of 9, again 9, elected leaders who form a local assembly. And the Universal House of Justice guides Baha'i through the distribution and publication of writings.
One of those in 1985 was the promise of world peace. And it outlined their objective for reaching world peace. But it's kind of important what they talk about. You want to read the next one. What did they stress?
Discrimination, racism, child abuse, hunger, opposition to technology and science.
These are issues they were against.
Against disparity, nationalism, religious strife, oppression of women, and education.
Right. So it's a little confusing. When we say opposition to technology and science, they are for technology and science.
Yes.
They look to those who suppress it and say, stop.
Yes.
So... I mean,
they fancy themselves very into science and very into forward progress in all of that.
Very progressive in all of these things.
Yes.
Like that's their hallmark.
It is the thing.
Which is great. I mean, we love the fact that they're against discrimination, racism, child abuse, hunger.
Of course. Yeah. I don't know of any faith that's not.
Yeah, no one says we're for those things.
Yeah.
All right, so those are their key historical leaders, brings us up to today.
Yes, and though there are thousands and thousands and thousands of writings, let's talk about some particular religious writings.
Yeah.
And it was not started with oral tradition, like many, but it was first written down. And
Yes.
because of that, there are many of them.
Yeah. So the most important documents, remember, we talked about 4 of their leaders. The first 2 are the only ones who claim to be manifestations of God. So their writings are considered to be divine. Remember, that's the Bab and the Baha'u'llah.
Yeah, and the rest are authoritative.
Right. So Abdul Baha, who came after, and Shoghi Effendi, who came after, those are authoritative writings, but they're not considered divine in origin.
Of those 4, 3 are related by genes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the writings of the first Bab, and then we'll do the writings of the Baha'u'llah.
So the Bab's writings are mainly interpretations of the Quran because his context was Shia Islam, out of which Baha'i faith comes. And in his commentary on the Surah of Joseph in 1844, he said he was the Bab. He was the gateway, the promised one.
I guess Surah of Joseph is one of the chapters of the Quran, I believe.
Yeah, must
Yeah.
be.
He also wrote, quote, the Book of the Spirit in 1845, where he identifies himself with Jesus and the Holy Spirit.
And then another key book that he wrote was called Utterance in 1847, which teaches the transcendence of Baha'i over Islam.
That did not make him popular in Iran.
I suspect that was probably one of the main things.
He was killed shortly after that. So then the Baha'u'llah comes along. He writes, we're going to list 4 things here. The 4 Valleys in 1856 says there's 4 ways to reach God: self, reason, love, and heart.
Okay. The 7 Valleys in 56 is about reaching God through search, love, knowledge, unity, contentment, wonderment, and nothingness.
In 1861, he wrote Certitude because he was being questioned about his legitimacy as claiming to be a manifestation of God. So he wrote a document called Certitude. In other words, he is.
Yes, yes. In 1873, he wrote The Most Holy Book. It covers many topics, including the universal house of justice.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into their beliefs, because this is probably the most important for you as you think. I mean, we've explained their history, their key leaders. Okay, but what do they believe? We said oneness, but let's talk about that, Scott. So the Baha'i faith, again, you can summarize it as teaching 3 core doctrines that focus on oneness or unity.
Yep.
And they say the problem in the world is that they're divided about these issues, and they just need to have oneness and unity on these 3 key things.
And that may be true.
Yeah, it may be. Yeah.
But oneness of God, oneness of humanity, and oneness of religion.
All right.
I don't know how you bring all those together, but
they try.
Oneness of God. Baha'is believe, or those of the Baha'i faith,
Sure.
whatever, believe that God is one, monotheistic.
They would say, and we would agree, he's transcendent, but they would say things like he's unified, and they would also say he's ultimately unknowable. We've seen that a lot.
Yes. A lot of this ineffable, you can't know him.
Right.
There's a lot of that. In fact, I would say that's the defining distinction between Christianity and pretty much everything else.
Remember, Jesus said that they may know you,
Yes.
the one true God,
Yes.
and Jesus Christ whom you have sent.
Yes.
Like Jesus says we can know God. In fact, that's the point.
There's a very clear sense in which Christianity is the only non-religion from below.
Yeah.
It's the only one where it's the other direction.
Right.
Anyway, we'll get into that later. However,
This God
who's unknowable is also compassionate and sends divine messengers who are manifestations of God, sends them in time and history, of course.
the Baha'u'llah.
Yeah. While there's only one deity, though, he is revealed throughout history to different people in all religions.
In all religions.
So this is the syncretistic part especially.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And that's why the Baha'i faith validates all religions that preceded it.
Oh.
Says
Only
they're
those
all valid.
who preceded it.
Yes.
Which I understand. You can't,
Right.
say we validate all the ones after.
Right.
But that does create some logic problems.
So this is a key point. They would basically say the religion that you practiced is valid.
That's great.
But it needs to lead to the Baha'i faith.
You need to be us.
Right.
Nonetheless.
Right. It's valid, though, which is why you'll never see them persecute another religion. It's just different manifestations of the same God throughout time.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Oneness of God. We just talked about oneness of humanity. What does that mean?
Well, they believe all humanity shares the same substance,
Okay.
which we would agree with. And so they would say the aim of Baha'i is to unite all people on earth because they're all equal.
In substance.
Right. And so in some ways, we're right with them on this. This is why, by the way, they're against slavery. They've promoted the equality of women. They've condemned racism. But it also explains why there's no clergy, because there's no need for any human intermediaries or those who have studied more or know more. Yeah. There's no need for that. Everyone is expected to play a part in their own spirituality to bring oneness and unity to all.
Which is interesting because it's all very like peace with all, and yet actually also I function as my own mediator in all of that in lots of ways. So oneness of God and oneness of humanity, oneness of religion, which we've touched on.
Yeah, but this is by far the most controversial, and we'll talk about this in our point of contact at the end. So what they say is human civilization has been evolving over time, which we agree with. So they say God works progressively over time. So the religion of God is one, they say. The religion of God is one, but it has to be renewed over time. So the point they would make here is the different manifestations of God, there are 9, and we'll get to that in a minute. There are 9 true manifestations of God that have appeared on the scene of history, and those are, you got them?
Krishna, Zoroaster, Abraham, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah.
Those are the 9. And what they say is they all teach the same message because they are all actually one soul that reflects the unity of God. It's one message, one single message.
Yeah. They only seem to have differences because of the context. And that's explained by this idea of progressive revelation.
Yeah.
So though they appear to differ, all the utterances are in the same sense, reality, expressions of one truth.
Yeah. So that's why they emphasize what all religions have in common.
Yeah.
Regardless of what any particular religion thinks about another.
Yes.
Because there are strong opinions out there.
Well, yes. So they don't take what a religious faith says about itself and what it believes. They take what they think they're missing and not seeing and interpreting that from their own vantage point, of course.
So it's all about oneness. Oneness, oneness, oneness.
Yeah. Worship practices.
Okay.
Simplicity.
As you might expect.
No clergy, you mentioned before. No sacraments, no sermons, no altars, no proselytization, no evangelizing, no local temples, nor rituals.
Seems pretty simple.
I think it does seem simple.
So what is the Baha'i faith? Well, they simply read prayers, there's some songs, and you can do this anytime, anywhere. They don't attend a house of worship. They prefer to meet in homes. Right. And as Scott pointed out, in the U.S., the only house of worship, when he wrote this in 2023, was in Chicago.
Suburban Chicago.
And you've been to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is very different.
Yeah.
The simplicity of it all thing.
So I don't know what that building
different.
was that was next to our church in Florida.
Yeah,
it said Baha'i.
I wondered that too.
But maybe it was just a place for them to get together and do social events. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not sure. All right, key numbers, because you've mentioned this before. Numbers are huge for them.
9.
Yes.
It represents completion. It means glory in Baha'i numerology, and there are 9 manifestations of God in history, which we just talked about. They use the 9-pointed star as a symbol of their religion. Houses of worship have 9 sides. The Feast of Ridvan lasts 9 days.
And then also 19. So the number 19 is important.
Because the Bab originally had 19 followers. 19 years transpired between the Bab and Baha'u'llah declarations. And 1 year comprises 19 months of 19 days.
Yeah, when I read that, I'm like, it does? So I did the math. That's 361. We're close.
Meetings occur in homes every 19 days.
Every 19 days.
It's a good thing our digital calendars can automatically do that now.
Yes.
It'd be hard to kind of like,
last point of a worship practice for them, because they're focused on oneness. This may not surprise you, but we want to point it out. They believe in consultation. What they mean by that is consulting others for guidance to arrive at a unified decision. So in other words, individuals or groups need to choose a humble, prayerful disposition in order to make decisions. And you want to make them unanimously as a group.
Yeah.
If you can't make them unanimously, all must still support the decision the majority take. It's all about consultation with others, arriving at unanimous decisions in the larger context of the community before key decisions are made. That's important to them because, again, it's about oneness,
right.
Unity.
So there are points of contact.
Yes.
And there's some positive things that Christians can agree with.
Absolutely.
We've already mentioned stance against things like discrimination, child abuse, disparity, etc. We are pro-education. We're pro,
equality of women.
Sure.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. They promote diversity. They work against slavery. They desire world peace. Like, none of those things do we have any issue with whatsoever. Like,
sure.
Yeah.
That's the means of some of those.
Sure. The means.
In fact,
right.
the means of lots of those, in lots of ways we would not. But
Dr. Cooper points out what he calls 4 inconsistencies with the Baha'i belief about oneness of religion. Remember,
Yes.
it's oneness of God, oneness of humanity, oneness of religion. And he says, whoa. There's 4 inconsistencies that when you talk to someone, this doesn't make sense.
Yes.
About the oneness of religion. So let's point those 4 out.
first is, if prior religions are outdated, shouldn't we feel the same about the 19th century Baha'i religion that started the Baha'i?
Right. The Baha'i religion, remember, in the mid-1800s was in Iran, written in Farsi.
Yeah.
It's in the context of Shia Islam, and it's in the context of the country of Iran. Well, if prior religions are outdated, isn't that one also outdated? Like, wouldn't it make more sense, if all religions are valid, for people to study in their own religious context today?
Because they said the problem was the context earlier.
Right. And it's just progressive revelation. Right. So if that's true, taken to its logical extreme, then there's no real value in learning about the Baha'i faith either.
Right. It's all flattened out according to context, and there's literally, logically, nothing that should say that anything is actually progressive and getting better or one.
Right. Like, today is 2024. Why don't I just study what I know today in my context?
That's right.
Why do I want to go back to your views starting 150 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he says that's just inconsistent to think that way.
So the claim, second inconsistency, the claim that God's revelation happens in successive stages and is universally applicable is wrong.
Right.
It's another way of saying something like what we just said.
Yeah, like we agree in progressive revelation, but there's a difference. They say at each point in time it was universally applicable. But Dr. Cooper points out, whoa. World religions emerge out of very specific contexts and local geographies.
Every single one of them.
Yes. For example, Judaism arose in the ancient Near East among a people who spoke Hebrew.
Yeah.
Sikhism, we studied that recently, arose in the Indian context among a small group of people who spoke Punjabi. These are not successive stages building on each other, and they're not universally applicable to all people at all times. Like, they're very specific in their context, where they originate, and what they're saying.
That's right. And that's akin to what I was trying to imply earlier, which is, let me say it this way. You have to evaluate people's faith practices and what they believe doctrinally based on what they communicate about those things. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be evaluations, criticisms, agreements like we're doing now. Mm-hmm. Duh. But you do have to take it on its own, on the face.
Yeah.
And what they communicate about what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
And not what you think they don't.
Yeah.
Which is functionally what that is.
Yeah, they flatten it too much, I would say. The third point that he disagrees with is, he says, look, if Baha'i says all previous world religions are valid, which they say, mm-hmm. why doesn't the Baha'i faith promote certain areas that are currently excluded? So, for example, the 9 manifestations of God that Scott mentioned all come from Asia and the Middle East. What about Africa, Latin America, Oceania? Those faiths and people who believe things are completely overlooked.
Yeah.
But remember, all faiths are supposed to be valid. Why are those neglected entirely?
Yeah. Ironically, because of the context within which this faith came out.
Yeah.
So that's 3. Number 4, on the other hand, Christians can agree with their emphasis on consultation to determine God's
hang
will.
on. There's one more before that. The messages.
You're right. There is another one before that.
Yeah, sorry.
The messages of the prophets. This is the 4th inconsistency.
Yeah.
The message of the prophets or manifestations of older religions are most certainly not the same.
Yeah, remember, what they say is oneness of religion. So all these manifestations who came along before are basically saying the same thing. That's their claim.
Right.
That their teachings are basically the same. Dr. Cooper says, no.
And in fact, none of them would say that.
I mean, think of those names. Krishna, Zoroaster, Abraham, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Bob, and Baha'u'llah, they certainly did not teach the same things.
No.
I mean, Scott, you and I, as we've gone through our world faiths, they're so different. Some believe the world is cyclical, others that it's linear.
That is a fundamental difference. It's a
can't say
difference
it's the same
in
thing.
category and kind entirely.
Right. Some say we live one life, others say we're reincarnated. Thousands and thousands.
I've never lived another knife.
How do you reconcile those and say they're the same thing?
Right.
Some say many gods, millions of gods, others say one God.
Yeah.
Some say good works, others say faith. Some say karma, others say grace.
Right.
These are fundamentally different things. It's too simplistic, Dr. Cooper says, to just say it's basically the same message.
It's not actually being fair to the people who say what they believe about what they believe.
It's not.
Yeah.
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 All right. So now the point you were starting to make. There's one thing that I think we can agree with very specifically with the Baha'i faith. And it's this idea of consultation, which is consulting others to determine God's will.
Yeah, which isn't saying, we believe in a democracy of God's will, because that was some of the implication earlier about how we read the Baha'i thing. Too often in American Christianity, though, we do arrive at decisions based on our own thinking and feeling.
How many times have you seen that, Scott, in the ministry?
It's all the time. It's all the time.
In the marriage ministry, we struggle with this idea because we want to help someone, and they come in with a preconceived idea that God has told them they can divorce, or God wants them to be happy, therefore they should leave their spouse.
I'm astounded at how many Christians say God told me.
Yeah, it's so much based on our own feelings, thinkings, study. It's so individualistic.
And what they're saying is, I have received revelation and truth from God, and you can couch it in whatever kind of way you want, but whether or not it actually fits with what we as Christians believe is his revelation, may or may not be a part of what you just said.
Yes.
And often it's not.
Yeah.
And other wise people around and the way that it's been interpreted throughout history and all of that. Yeah.
So what we do effectively is we neglect the power of the Christian community for guidance to our own detriment.
And most of the New Testament is written to the Christian community.
Right. So just a couple verses for you where we need the body of Christ because we have different giftings, different abilities, different perspectives from God and the power of the community.
Yes, Ephesians 4:7, but grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. So each one of us
has something to contribute to the community.
That's right.
Which is what the very next verse says, 1 Corinthians 12:7.
Each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good.
For the common good.
Yeah.
And Scripture's clear, we also need the guidance of our pastors and elders and those in authority over us who are shepherding our souls.
And those who know us well.
Right. It could be your regen leader. It could be the facilitator of your re-engaged marriage group. But Hebrews 13:17 is clear on this.
We're ending on Hebrews 13:17.
We are.
Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account.
Right. Now, I've expanded that idea of leadership because it's not just you as lead pastor or me as elder.
It does say leaders.
It does.
Yeah.
But I think so in this regard, we would applaud the Baha'i faith in the sense that they discourage individual decisions for what is God's will and say, let's couch it in terms of the larger community of faith. And we would say, we actually agree with that.
Sure.
We see too much American cowboy Christianity. I arrive at this decision on my own and God told me, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah, that's right. That's not a statement about cowboy churches in our community.
Sorry. Nothing about that.
I know.
Individualistic. Lone Ranger Christianity.
Yeah. We believe in a plurality of elders.
Yes. We do.
We don't believe in one.
No.
And then others are below.
Right. We practice this within our own leadership, which is Scott is one of 5 elders. And we all arrive at decisions together. And let me add this. Our 3 campus pastors are in those same meetings to help us define what God's will is, where we're going, what the scriptures say, and how we move forward. In other words, there's 8 of us. Mm-hmm. So we try to practice this.
Yeah, and it's interesting how often I have to say to people, listen, I don't make this decision by myself as much as you may think or see or
Right, you're
assume.
the mouthpiece in many ways, but I know.
But
'cause
one
I
of
meet
quite a
with you
few.
weekly.
Yeah, right.
On these issues.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, we would commend the Baha'i faith
Yeah.
for their emphasis on the community discerning God's will.
And I like how you said that earlier about it sort of forces the humility
It does.
piece of that.
Yeah.
I think that's huge.
Yeah, they emphasize that. So
Yeah.
we commend that. Hope
Good
that's
stuff.
helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.